Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining this session today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are based. My name is Scott Griffin. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Press Institute. For those of you who don't know IPI, we're a global network of editors, journalists, and media executives defending press freedom and independent journalism. We're pleased to be hosting this event on Myanmar today as part of our efforts to keep the situation there in the global eye and shine a light on the continued brutality of the crackdown on democracy in general, but in particular on press freedom. And what we're going to do today is do that with two fantastic speakers who are going to help us understand what is happening in Myanmar and be here to answer your questions. So just to give a little bit of a quick introduction, we'll start by having a sort of a back and forth between myself and the two speakers whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But then after that, we'll have an ample time for Q&A among the participants here today. And at any time during the discussion, please go ahead and put your question, if you have a question, into the chat. You can also raise your hand, and we will also give you the opportunity to ask your question verbally if you choose to turn on your microphone. You're also welcome to keep your video on. This is a meeting rather than a webinar. If you choose to do so, please feel free. And as I said, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A later on. So let me briefly introduce our two speakers today. Very happy to have them with us. First is Myint, who is the founding editor-in-chief and managing director of Mizzima Media Group. Soy was previously in exile for 24 years while Myanmar was under the previous military dictatorship, and was one of the first exile media to move back to Myanmar in January 2012. IPI honored Mizzima Media back in 2007 with its Free Media Pioneer Award. And since the military coup, Mizzima has continued to report, although the military regime shut down its free-to-air Mizzima TV channel in 2021, but it's continuing to broadcast news and information through other channels, through social media, and through its satellite television channel. He and his colleagues are, and he will talk about this, presently working from different hideouts in the country. Second, we have with us Lei Win, who is a freelance Burmese journalist living in Europe. Thin is a specialist correspondent covering food security and climate change stories globally. After nearly 13 years reporting on these issues for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, she was born and raised in Myanmar and is the founder and former chief correspondent of Myanmar Now news agency, and also the co-founder of the nonprofit storytelling project Kite Tales, which chronicles the lives and histories of ordinary people across Myanmar. So once again, thanks very much to So and Thin for being with us today to talk about this increasingly brutal crackdown in Myanmar. It's something that IPI has been covering from the beginning. We're looking now at the arrest of more than 80 journalists. I believe around 45 still remain behind bars at the moment. Licenses of news media have been revoked. We see internet crackdowns, and of course this going on in the background is the overall crackdown against pro-democracy protests, which is becoming increasingly brutal and increasingly bloody, and doesn't really show signs of stopping at the moment despite the international condemnation. So that's what we're looking at today, and I want to start just by giving each of you the chance to paint us a general picture of what's going on at the moment. And I'd like to start with you. So if you could give us a little bit of an idea of what you and your colleagues are going through at the moment, and what that's like, and then we'll go to some more specific questions. If you could just, as I said, paint that general picture for us to get us started. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Should I start, Scott?
Please do so. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As Scott rightly mentioned, that repression continues. In fact, it is escalating. when we talked last 3 months ago, the Mizzima, for example, was not banned yet. Our channel was shut down. That was what we talked last time. And, and then on March 8th, Mizzima, along with 4 other independent media licenses were revoked. And now today, we have already 8 independent media's licenses were revoked and banned in the country. You know that more than 40 journalists and media personnel are being still detained in the country, and the crackdown against the media houses, independent media houses, and journalists continue. Just for example, yesterday evening, office of the one media outlet in Shan State was raided, and the military regime and their personnel searched the office. So there have been many similar cases in different parts of the country, whereas independent, the offices and the places of the independent media outlets have been searched, the journalists have been targeted. Now there have been more and more targeted arrests. Initial first months, second months, we see random arrests more or less, but now there have been more and more targeted arrests. And you would also, I think, remember that the military regime was seizing the satellite dishes across the country some time ago. And just yesterday, they again made a public announcement that whoever watch this satellite, the independent news channel through these satellite dishes can be punished with the 1-year jail sentence and fine penalty. So the crackdown continue. But I must say that despite all this brutal crackdown against the journalists and media outlets, the media in Burma, Myanmar continue its work. Most of the journalists and editors continue to work and report and broadcast for Mizzima. We have been continuously without interruption broadcasting and publishing since after the military coup day. And likewise, many of our colleagues are risking their lives every day, and but continue to report, publish independent news and information about the country, what is happening in the country.
Thank you. So I want to pick up maybe just and stick with you and just pick up a little bit on what you said there before going over to Thin. You mentioned that you and your colleagues are still managing to do work, and I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about how that is actually working on the ground. How are you managing to still do your job in terms of collecting and publishing news and information? Can you give us a little bit of window on how you're able to do that still?
As I mentioned last 3 months ago when we talked first time, we are also in a way prepared for the eventual military coup before it actually happened on 1st February. And of course, in few days after the coup, by the time we already are scattered in groups in different parts of the country, because that is a part of our plan to be able to report from wherever we are. So we are in different places of the country. I myself is in an area inside the country, not under the control of the Burmese military, but outside Yangon. Other of my colleagues are also in different parts of the country, including in the cities like Yangon, Mandalay, and others. And some of us, in the meantime, have been able to manage to reach to neighboring countries. Just today, some of our colleagues arrived in New Delhi with a court order in India to seek protection from UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So what that means is we continue our work in different places of the country, mainly in the country, but also from outside the country. That is how we are managing and continuing our work. Of course, it is not easy because we have to, for example, I'm sitting in a studio which looks like quite a good studio. In fact, it is a makeshift studio with a black color background for the screen. But we continue to. I am very proud to say that our colleagues have been able to produce and write and report the news as we have been doing. To some extent, the quality is also still good enough. And then our fight and our struggle is, one is to work under this kind of difficult situation, but also to keep our professionalism as best as we can. Because, like, for example, it is difficult that you will know to get a source to talk to us through phone and internet because of the communication challenges. But our work is, we are trying to our best to make sure that we keep our professionalism as best as possible under these challenges.
Thank you very much. So I think that's on the one hand, obviously, that the situation is disturbing, but I think it's also it's great. It's good to hear that you are still able to do your basic work during the situation. And we'll come back to this, I think. But I would like to now pass over to Thin and ask you to do something similar. You know, you're not based in Myanmar at the moment, but obviously in close contact with people on the ground there. Can you give us as well sort of your initial overall description of the current environment?
Sure. I guess, you know, Myint has already given set the scene very, very well to give you a sense of what it is like in Myanmar. But I think I would also like to just perhaps emphasize the point that, you know, journalism has always been a dangerous profession in Myanmar. You know, neither the junta nor the democratically elected government have actually supported or defended independent journalism that sort of questioned the established narrative. So journalists have always been the target of the authorities. But this current situation that we are seeing is unprecedented. You know, I've been a journalist for more than 15 years, and obviously Myint has much more experience than I am, but this is possibly one of the worst in terms of scale. So before that, right, we had censorship and we had very limited media, but in the past 10 years, because of the opening that we have seen and this vibrant media landscape that, you know, was born out of it, the scale of repression that we are seeing now is like I said, it's unprecedented. And I just like you to just, you know, one of the things, so, you know, Myint was talking about how many people are still detained. You mentioned that, you know, at least 2 of them are my friends. Many of them have not slept in their homes since the 1st of February. Many of them have not been able to see their families. And I was talking to a senior editor of an ethnic news media outlet, and they were saying, you know, my staff are placed in extremely difficult positions because they can hide, they can go into hiding, they can find a safe house. But what about their families? Because at the moment, the junta, they would come to the house, and if they can't find you, they can take your family members, they can take your siblings, they can take your parents, they can take your children. There is absolutely no ethical or moral line, you know, that the junta doesn't seem willing to, you know, cross. So it's making it not just difficult in terms of operating a newsroom, but also there's heavy personal costs to a lot of journalists. They are being targeted, and you don't even have to be from a banned news outlet like Mizzima or Myanmar, which I founded, but is now being managed by a completely different group. You don't have to belong to either of, you know, any of the 8 banned media outlets. Just by being a journalist, even if you know your outlet still has a media license, just by being a journalist makes you a target. And you know, you can get threats, harassment, and worse. And that's the atmosphere that journalists at the moment are operating. Just very briefly, I guess one other thing that the junta has done is to use a new penal code called Penal Code 505A, which is a new section that they've introduced with a potential prison term of 3 years. They are targeting a lot of people who are outspoken on social media or journalists with this penal code. They've also made it, like both of you have alluded to, the internet shutdowns, which made it really difficult for communications, particularly in the newsroom, which is really crucial. But it's also made it extremely difficult for ordinary people to actually access news that is not propaganda. And it has been amazing to me that the local Myanmar media, like Go So Myint said, continues to cover it, the issue extensively. And a lot of it is also thanks to citizen journalists, ordinary people, mainly young, just with their mobile phones, providing news, footage, images to journalists and media outlets. And they are doing it at the risk of their lives because of media shutdowns, because mobile data internet has been disabled. They are risking using insecure channels to actually try and make sure that the world stays informed about what is happening in Myanmar. So, I think despite all the horror that's happening at the moment, I think what's happened in the last 3 months in terms of media coverage has shown the commitment and courage of journalists in and around Myanmar that are covering the issue.
Yeah, thank you for that, Finn. I completely agree. It sounds like the amount of courage it is taking is really incredible. And later we'll talk about how the international community can support what journalists in Myanmar are doing. Just briefly, you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning this, the criminal code and section 505A, which is being used as a main tool against journalists at the moment. I mean, is this right now what you would describe as sort of the main instrument of repression against the press? Is it the threat of imprisonment? You mentioned also sort of other forms of harassment, harassment of family members. Is there also the threat of physical violence on the streets? Are journalists being targeted as well for this type of physical attacks? If you could just sort of say, these are sort of the key tools I imagine that the junta is using, but maybe we're missing something.
Yes, so the Penal Code 505A obviously is the main legal tool that they are using at the moment, at least when it comes to bringing arresting journalists or putting them on wanted list, or some journalists who are already in jail, they're charging them with that. Yes, there is, they are harassing family members. There is always a threat of physical violence. We've heard in the last 3 months, at least, a number of cases where journalists have either been beaten up or while covering the protest. One photojournalist was shot in the hand while they were trying to take pictures. And these are just the cases that we know about. I'm sure there are so many other cases that we don't know about, and particularly in ethnic areas, which do not have perhaps the same media presence as you would have in Naypyidaw or Mandalay or Yangon, and where the junta's presence have always been there, and where the repression has always been worse. We can expect that there's even worse abuses going on. But those are the main tools that they're using to try and make things really, really difficult for media outlets to operate in Myanmar.
Thanks a lot. Maybe coming back now to So, I want to say a little bit on this topic of how you're able to do your job. I mean, you mentioned the difficulty of communication, the internet shutdowns. How are you actually able to collect collect news and information on the ground right now? I mean, do you have reporters who are still working on the ground? Are they taking different sorts of precautions? I mean, how are you really able to, where is your information coming from? Is it also coming from, citizen journalists, from the public? How are you able to stay on top of what's happening and get it back to the public? If you could just give us a little bit more information about that.
Generally speaking, newsroom operation has been now going on as it was during the COVID-19. I would say we are now in a new normal. If we say new normal situation for the COVID, after COVID and during the COVID crisis, we would say we are in the new normal situation. The reporters on the ground, the journalists on the ground, they are doing the work through phones, through internet, through messenger, through Viber. So that is how they have been largely doing, rather than face-to-face personally interviewing or reporting live on the streets nowadays. That is one. Secondly, we also have, as it is mentioned, many citizen journalists. When I say citizen journalists, many of them are even professional camera persons and professional. They seems to be trained in at least some journalism, basic journalism, because when they send their reports to us, because I deal with these reports every day personally, I see that they are like what our reporters would be reporting. I mean, not everyone, but many of them are. And we do have freelance journalists in different parts of the country still. Having said that, of course, some of them are also charged with, as mentioned, like 505A. The problem with all this legal issue is we don't know what charges we are charged against with. For example, I just found out that me and Tam from Mizzima are charged with 505A just a few minutes before. That was not made public announcement by the military regime. So many of us would have been charged with 505A by the military regime. And we are also, since we are also interviewing through Zoom and Viber with National Unity Government, which is outlawed by the military regime, we can be charged. I will not be surprised that if we are charged with another charge, another like 17A, which is association with quote unquote unlawful association associated. So we will be charged. I will not be surprised if there are charges one after another against us, and I will not be even knowing. But we continue to operate as we were in a way. It's tough, I must say, it's tough, particularly when the internet is shut down. The phone lines we know are monitored, so we have to use different precautions. So basic, and for me personally, and many of the journalists are not new to this situation, as Matte has pointed out. We have been, in fact, working under difficult situation for all these decades, particularly for us when we were in exile. We have to use all the available security, safety measures to make sure that we are safe enough and continue the work. That is what we are doing. So in my opinion, this will continue like this until the military goes back to the barrack.
Thank you for that. So, and yeah, I remember also that this is what we talked about last time a little bit, that, you know, the situation in Myanmar has always been difficult. And as Thin said, I think, you know, now it's unprecedented, but even when we spoke before, you know, the fact that you had already been preparing for the possibility that things will worsen, you know, it says a lot, I think, about the general media environment. I mean, I think it would also be interesting to ask you right now before we go ahead. I mean, you know, you also mentioned there's this incredibly arbitrary system, you know, with a 505A, you know, charges are being brought. Nobody really knows what they're being charged with. We have this incredible harassment going on against the media. are you seeing, that the journalists are trying to leave the country? Is there starting to be another move into exile, or are people really saying, no, we're here to stay and we're here to remain to report the news despite the threats to us? What's happening there?
As far as I know, particularly with my colleagues in the organization, uh, in fact, I want every one of them to be safe. I want every one of them not to get arrested, because anything can happen to someone who get arrested. It is a kind of we are not surprised if someone next day call up and say, please come and take the body of the person that was taken last night. So we are not new to such situation. I'm really worried about the colleagues who are in Yangon, Mandalay, and major cities, and also in the ethnic areas who are known and journalists, and who are in the record as journalists. But when I ask them, when I talk with them, do you want to leave the country? Do you want to go to neighboring countries? Most of them say, no, we will not go. We will stay inside the country as long as we can. That's why I have seen only very few who could not stay anymore in the country had to leave. And very, very few, as far as I know, majority of the Burmese journalists, editor, media personnel. When I say journalists, we also should not forget that the non-journalist colleagues who also risk more or less the same as journalists, because the military regime do not differentiate between a journalist and admin staff, and they give everyone the troubles. So many of them continue to work in the country. Only very few leave the country. I would say, looking forward to for example, next few months, if the military regime continues to be in the country, and if the military regime still in this position, I would say many of us will be in a combined operations. Like a lot of work are still inside the country, but some work will be outside the country. That is how I would see in next 2 years' time, but which is different from what we were in exile. Before 2012, we were in exile, but we were largely in exile with the colleagues working underground. But this time, it could probably be a combined operation, a lot of work, large part of the work inside the country, particularly in the areas which are not under the control of the military regime. But some operations would be outside the country. That is how I would sort of foresee for next 2 years, if the military regime still is ruling the country, or trying to rule the country.
Thanks a lot. So, and then I would like to sort of ask you a similar question. I mean, again, you're in contact with a lot of people in the country. What is sort of keeping them going amid these threats and harassment? Are you also hearing something similar, that people are determined to stay and cover the situation? And again, so what is keeping them motivated to do so?
I guess the easier question is that some of them, a small number has left, those who are able to leave, through legal channels, let's just say. And that's not easy, yeah, because if you are carrying a Myanmar passport, to get visas to, within ASEAN, it's much easier than when I first started out as a journalist. But like also Myint, I think earlier said when we were having our own discussion, neighboring countries, there are some that are just not really friendly towards independent media. So you have to think about that as well. So if you've left the country, then the question is, where do you go? What do you do? Can you still continue reporting? If so, how? And so a larger part of people that I know are like Gosomian and some of the Mizzima are in areas that are under the control of ethnic armed groups, but there are also people who have left just because they are a bit too high profile. and being anywhere within Myanmar territory, even if it is not run by the junta, just puts them in danger. But then there is still quite a large group of people who, I think you have to imagine in the last 10 years, the media industry, we had lots of new journals, new media outlets, new broadcast channels. Journalists were very proud of their jobs. A lot of the journalists had their photo bylines. Many are now identifiable, right, to the junta and to people who want to bring harm to them if they want to. So some of them, because their names are already on wanted lists, they cannot leave. They are stuck. So that's, a big worry for many of us who are outside and who wants them to stay safe. Having said that, there's a lot of anger in what is happening, because within the span of 3 months, right, the junta has dragged Myanmar back by decades. When we're not just talking about in terms of media, we're talking about in terms of every single development, indicator you want to talk about. So there's a lot of anger, and there's also a lot of, responsibility that they feel. They feel like they need to stay and inform the world of what is happening. I grew up in Myanmar in the 80s and 90s, when there was no internet, when we were still very much under lockdown. And remember the feeling of isolation that we felt and the people felt, not knowing if the rest of the world knows we exist. And I think there is this responsibility and this new, these journalists where they feel like they need to stay, they need to tell people what is happening. They need to tell people within the country and outside the world, Myanmar is still here, we are still suffering, please do something. And I think there's a lot of anger and responsibility, combined, that make them, despite the risks, stay and continue to do their jobs.
And do you think that journalists are feeling that international support? I mean, you mentioned this, that this desire to keep the story, to keep telling the story, to keep informing people of what's going on. Are they feeling supported right now by the international community? Are you getting that sense?
Oh, that's, in general, I would say no. There's been a lot of platitudes. There's been a lot of concerns being raised, but the community at large in Myanmar, not just journalists, feel that not a lot of action has followed the words. I think in journalists, in some sense, understand that perhaps some of the disconnect between what the people on the ground want and what the international community can give. It's, journalists understand that there is a disconnect, and that some of, what the ordinary people want is just not viable. But having said that, I am hearing from, some of my journalist friends who have left Myanmar or who are in, EAO areas, about, serious challenges they're facing in running their newsrooms, and just having so many challenges, particularly in terms of funding, because a lot of the people that I've spoken to, freelance journalists, as well as people who are still running newsrooms or planning to continue running them while, after they've regrouped and restarted, funding has been one of the big issues, and they just have not received any particular, concrete support in terms of paying, salary of their staff, or even supporting the citizen journalists that is, bringing them with news, just practical, support. I know there are a lot of funds and, grants that are going on, but institute owners who might be in this, please have some flexibility and understanding and empathy, because we are talking about particularly, small newsrooms who have been covering in ethnic areas that have always faced repressions. They don't have the capacity or the manpower, or frankly, the time to write reams and reams of proposals, going through detailed theory of change to try and get these grants. What they need is practical funding support right now. So whether you're an individual or institutional donor, if you can support independent media in any way, I would just really, really like to ask you to do that. That's the one big message I have today.
Thank you so much. Then I think that's such an important message. And as you say, you know, this is an emergency situation where, and I think you nailed it. People don't have the time. They don't have the time or the wherewithal at the moment to be preparing detailed applications, but the support is so needed at the moment as quickly as possible. So I think your point is very well taken. I just want to quickly, maybe briefly, just remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and do so in the chat, or go ahead and raise your hand. I'll see it, and we'll call on you shortly. But please do go ahead and start asking questions if you have them. So maybe coming back to you just before we go to questions again. You know, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, the next 2 years, so where things could be headed. Can you try to give us a little bit of your analysis of what we're looking at? I mean, it's been now 3 months since the coup, a little over 3 months. Things seem to be worsening, or at least not improving. The open violence seems to be increasing, the open repression. Are you expecting that things, and I'm speaking more about the general situation now, not just about the press freedom situation, but you know, as a media analyst, as an editor, are you expecting things to worsen in the coming months, or to improve slightly? How do you analyze the current the next steps?
The way I see the situation in general is who wants power, and particularly the guy who wants to be the president of the country, and the people who do not want to live under the military regime, who cherish democracy and human rights, who are very much determined not to. They have enjoyed little in limited democratic space in the last 8-9 years. So that is the fight now we are seeing. We are seeing the more and more brutal crackdown and techniques by the military regime in suppressing the peoples, particularly those who speak out against the military regime, those who speak out for freedom and democracy. We have seen more and more brutal crackdown. When I say brutal crackdown, military repression is always brutal in generally, but now we are seeing inhumane brutal crackdown. Like, for example, as dragging the body, the dead body, along the road in public, and that is inhumane brutality. That is what I mean. Beating and destroying the motorbikes which are on the road, not distinguishing who is who. That is inhumane brutality, I would say. Arresting at night and just next day give a call that come and get the body. That is inhumane brutality, I would say. So we have seen such brutal crackdown more and more, but also the fight of the people who are determined, as I mentioned, very much determined to protect their rights, to fight back for their rights. The struggle is very strong. They are fighting back. You would remember when we talked last times, there were calls by the people on the streets to have even military intervention by the United Nations, by the United States. They were calling for military intervention even. Now what the people are doing, the people have taken up armed struggle by themselves to fight back the military regime. Yesterday, National Unity Government, NUG, formed the People's Defense Force, PDF, which is the first in Burma, Myanmar history, such united nationwide armed organization, armed force fighting against the military. So I would say in next few months, please do not get surprised or be ready. We will have more and more armed fightings in different parts of the country because military regime is having more and more brutal crackdown, and the people are not going to give up. The people will fight back. So we will see more such confrontation and fightings in different parts of the country in next few months.
Thank you. So, I mean, the picture you paint, I think, is on the one hand extremely disturbing, and I think this inhumane brutality is something that is, you know, is trickling out in the international media. We're seeing it, but I think it's another thing to hear you talk about it. But on the other hand, yeah, the fact that people are still willing to fight for their democracy, I think, is also a powerful message as well. So thanks for that. Let me go ahead right now and go to some of the questions from the participants. Yeah, we have a couple of raised hands, so I'll go to those first. We have Ravi Prasad. So if you've raised your hand, please go ahead and unmute your microphone and just briefly state your question. Go ahead, Ravi.
Thank you, Scott. Hope you can hear me all. My very simple question is, how are the families of journalists coping with this? As you both said, they are under pressure. If the authorities don't find the journalists, they start harassing the families. And also the families of journalists who are at work, they must be fearing for themselves. So how are the families coping with it? The wives, the brothers, sisters, kids? That's my question. Thank you.
I'm not sure which one of you, if one of you would like to take that one.
So, do you want to go first?
Martin, please go. Yeah,
oh, sure.
I will come.
Well, okay, so I am now just sort of speculating because I've mainly spoken to the journalists themselves, not exactly their immediate family members, or at least not as many. I'd like just to refer back to what Go So Myint said. You know, the military's conduct in the last 3 months have been beyond the pale, and that has also made the people much more determined to not let them win. You know, and that consciousness, I think, is pretty much across the board, across Myanmar. So in many ways, people are very, very, very scared, including family members of journalists, but they are also aware of the larger fight and the longer fight that is at play. And from the impressions that I get from what I'm hearing, I have not come across, people who said, oh, my family has told me to stop doing this. And I know it can sound a bit fatalistic, and in a way it is, but that's the impression I get, where people are like, yep, we are in for the long haul. This is bad. It's probably going to get worse. We need to be prepared for everything, but we are going to continue doing this. Yeah, if I can just very briefly, if there are silver linings amid all this horror, is number one, the public now really values independent journalism. I think a few years ago, because of all that's happening with the Rohingya issue and others, there was this massive, almost fracture between, ordinary people thinking journalists, particularly international journalists, being unfair towards Myanmar and criticizing Myanmar without knowing the full context. Now that inhumane treatment that Go So Myint mentioned just now, people have noticed that, and people have noticed the kind of risk journalists are taking. They are much more, they've become so much more aware of the kind of situations journalists have to go through. And the other side is that they're also now realizing that the military's propaganda, they believe the propaganda when it comes to ethnic groups and the Rohingya, and there is this bigger transformation that is happening within the society because of that inhumane treatment. See, understanding, oh my God, this is how the military has been behaving all the past 70 years against minority ethnic groups. And we are only seeing it now in the center. And the country has become, in many ways, much more united and has a much more, same goal than that has ever before. People are apologizing to the Rohingya. People are apologizing to the ethnic minority, saying, we are sorry that we did not speak out on your behalf. So, despite all the horrible stuff, there are some good things that have come out of it.
Thank you, Thin. So I see quite a few questions now
can I-
rolling in.
can
Sorry. So did you want to answer that as well? Go ahead.
Yeah, just yes, majority of the people in the country, in fact, not only the Burmese citizens or Burmese, but also even foreigners living in the country, they don't feel safe at all anymore in the country. They are worried. They have to keep. They keep worrying about. What is going to happen in next few minutes or next few hours. That is the kind of the situation, and definitely family members of journalists and other professionals, like for example CDMs, those who are doing obedience movement, their families are definitely worried, but they are ready in a way mentally and psychologically that they will they will be living in such a situation because they don't want to live under the military regime, and they know that the struggle and the fight has to continue. I would say that, of course, Sam may not be able to risk their life. For example, for us, we are ready to die. We are ready to sacrifice any day. Tomorrow, now, we are ready. But many people may not be like that. But they continue the fight in different ways. They continue to, like, for example, many are doing whatever they can to share the news and information so that they struggle. So those are also like that. In my opinion, most of the people know very well now that the struggle is not by one or section, society or organization or party. It is the struggle of the people across all walks of life, across all the divisions that Burma, Myanmar have had. So it is the realization, and it is the reality. That is what the people are committed to.
Okay, maybe I'll take one question from the chat now and then go back to the next raised hand. So we have a question from Felix from Deutschland Radio, from German radio. He's asking, his question is about, I'll just read it out. It's about prominent people in Myanmar, and especially athletes that have taken a side in the conflict. And he asks, considering their prominence, do you think it's easier to take a side because the public expects these people to do so, or is it more difficult because eyes will be on you? Is there a history of celebrities, athletes in Myanmar being politically engaged? So it's a question about the role of prominent people in this resistance. I don't know if so or Thin, either of you would like to take that question. Go ahead.
Let me take this question because Felix was also asking me in an email communication that I cannot answer Felix. The difference that I see between what we were after 1988 and now is celebrities, the role of celebrities and the role of prominent personalities who are now publicly coming out against the military regime. That is very important. And that's there, as we are seeing now. I mean, there were some skill, but now we are seeing most of the celebrities and many prominent personalities coming out publicly. One is because Facebook is there where they can speak out against the military regime. That's why military regime is also particularly targeting the celebrities. They make 20 20 persons every day, every night at 8 p.m. news through their propaganda television channel of these celebrities being charged with 505A. So that is one. I have saw a report just a few days ago. One swimmer, national swimmer, he is the champion, national champion. He refused to participate in the Olympic game because he doesn't want to represent the military regime, because military regime is in the country. He doesn't want to represent them in the Olympic game. So he refused to, he finally decided not to join the Olympic game. So people and many such personalities are publicly fighting against the military regime, which is the difference, in my opinion, of what we were in 1988 after.
Thank you. So we have now, I see a raised hand from Rajesh. Daniel, if you would like to unmute, and maybe just also say briefly, if you can, just introduce yourself very briefly, and then go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Scott. My name is Rajesh. I'm based in Bangkok, an old friend of Tin from long ago. I had a quick question about, thank you so much for both of you for your words and also describing the brutality of this regime. So I had a question more about the cyberspace. We realize how the streets are really dangerous. How safe, to your knowledge, is cyberspace? How sophisticated is the Myanmar regime these days in tracking people's locations, mining computers, listening into phone calls? What is the level of security that people can expect? Because we know that there are these brave young people going out and taking photos and sending it out to people, including newswires. How safe are they in the cyberspace?
Oh, Rajesh,
Really important question.
You kicked the hornet's nest.
Sorry.
So, okay, there are two aspects to it. One is the what they have, and the second aspect is whether they are capable of using them or they know how to use them. So if you look at, so this is some work that I have been doing, so that's why I'm able to talk about this. So if you look at some of the leaked budgets that have come out, and I think New York Times have written about it, and I think Washington Post have written, there are a suite of quite worrying technology that the government is looking at, and they've been buying it up over the last few years, or at least it appeared in the budget. Now, there's a question, obviously, of whether that is going to be targeted towards activists and political activists and politicians, and maybe perhaps journalists like they do, or whether that's going to be targeted towards a much larger population. We don't know. I think we can sort of safely guess and estimate that they probably want to emulate the Great Firewall that China has, but that is something that was a result of many years of building their own infrastructure. Myanmar does not have that yet. Now, having said that, there are definitely a lot of things that they can do to snoop around, particularly if they know high-profile journalists, if they know what phone numbers they're using, what channels they're using. There are a lot of channels that journalists and ordinary people in Myanmar use every day that are absolutely not secure and are completely unencrypted. The problem is that because of the they disable the mobile internet and the Wi-Fi broadband and all of that stuff, some of those things is really difficult to use if you don't have reliable internet. So then it becomes a choice of, do we get the news out? Do we tell what's happening versus do we wait until we get a secure channel, a secure internet, and use VPN? So those are difficult choices that journalists in Myanmar make every day. And I personally have serious concerns about the if not the capability, at least the intention of the junta in terms of the kind of tools that they want to use and plan to use. Just things very, and the thing is, I think this is just one last point. For the last 10 years, when Myanmar finally opened up and we suddenly, have SIM cards that used to cost hundreds of dollars become $1.50, and people started having 2 mobile phones and multiple SIM cards. It was very open. Everybody was putting their pictures, their phone numbers, contact details, all online, because there were no, the younger generation perhaps were not worried about regress, about the country, going back on its opening. Unfortunately, that's what happened. And, some of the people, cybersecurity and digital security people that I've been talking to recently were saying, some of the arrests that happened, not necessarily journalists, but for example, public sector workers who were participating in the civil disobedience movement, they got caught because they put up their mobile numbers on Facebook to say, if you need support, here we are. And that's how the authorities track them down. So yeah, I have real concerns whether they have they have the true skills and capability to do it. I'm not sure yet, but they definitely have the equipment and they definitely have the intention.
Let me just go to So on this as well. So how deep are your concerns and the concerns about your colleagues about cybersecurity, about different tools that the junta may be adopting to track journalists, to identify them? How much of this is in your thoughts as you do your work right now?
One of the weak points that we are having and we are facing every day is cybersecurity. We don't have enough resources and also time and energy to take care of the issue. We know the fact that Myanmar military personnel have been all these years trained and supported technically, materially by China and Russia. We all know that is the fact. We all know the fact that our colleagues got arrested, and then we found out that they have been monitored, and their conversations have been leaked and monitored. Only after during the interrogation we found out. So, but the problem is, as Myint has pointed out, for us, we also need to work. We also need to report as because journalist work is to report as timely. I mean, it is a real-time basic work. I cannot keep telling my colleagues that, okay, don't report, but we try to make sure first about your safety. I cannot keep, because they also want to report as it is happening, because fightings right now as we speak, there are fightings in the north. Shall I wait someone in Mizzima to not report before making sure or send the report as quickly as possible? So that is the dilemma, and that is the kind of the challenge and weak point. One of the weak points that we have every day. But to be honest, we don't have resources. We don't have luxury, I would say, to take this issue. And if someone gets arrested. That sort of situation we are in. And we also do not have because how shall we do? Shall we have a trainee? Shall we bring in the equipments now? No, because military regime has been all these years and decades being trained and supported technically, materially. That is the fact, by China and Russia. That is the fact.
Thanks to both of you. I think there was a really important question from Rajesh, and I think the answers also were very important for people to hear. And this dilemma that both of you mentioned, the dilemma of, on the one hand, waiting or to have secure forms of communication for obvious reasons to protect you and your sources, but on the other hand, the need to get news out and not having this luxury of waiting for that. So thanks to you both for those answers. We have a couple of comments and questions now coming back to the issue of international support. So let me just share those. So Jane, and some of these are comments, I think, so I'll read them out. And then there's a question, so maybe I'll come back to Thin on some of these. So Jane mentions in response to the question about available funding, she's saying that she mentions that there is a diversity of emergency and other types of funding available to media in the ethnic states and regions, as well as national media. But in some cases, she says it may not be flexible or quick enough, but it does exist. But yeah, she says it may be a difficult situation for freelancers and citizen journalists. And another note from Karen, who mentions also regarding funding, that on a logistical note, because of the closures and restrictions on banks and transfers, it's difficult to get money into Myanmar at the moment, and difficult for organizations to withdraw it from accounts. So it's making it harder for donors to provide that support safely and quickly. So we have those two comments. And then a more concrete, concrete question from Isabel, who's asking, is there any possibility to set up a sort of a coordinated international media fund by international donors, for setting up a sign of supporting media freedom in Myanmar financially and having a coordinative support according to the given needs of media, both in exile and in the country? Tin, I don't know if you would like to respond to any of those comments about the support possibilities, and to this suggestion from Isabella about some kind of coordinative mechanism for international donors to support media in Myanmar.
No, just to say, I guess, thank you for the comments, and would be really interested to hear about some of the opportunities. Feel free to contact me on social media or anywhere, and because I know quite a lot of, I think, organizations and individual journalists who might be, who are in need of support, essentially. And great if we can set up something integrated. Not so great if it is going to be yet another fund that is just going to be, to be a barrier. As long as, as much as we can simplify and make it fast, that's my only request. And yes, the banks are a big issue, but there are ways of getting money in there that might necessarily be, for donors, they might sort of bulk at some of the informal ways, but there are ways of getting around it, whether to set up something in Bangkok or to, use more informal networks. Thanks for those comments.
Thanks. And anybody
can I add one point?
Yes, of course. So please.
One point? With Mizzima experience, we made a public request to international community in first week of around first part of the February, and we did receive emergency support. If you remember, on 7 February, I made a public request through this meeting, and then a few days after, we started receiving emergency contingency support from international community, individuals and organizations. I think Mizzima is, in my opinion, lucky enough because I had opportunity and luxury to have this kind of discussion with all of you. But many of the smaller, particularly those who are struggling and working in the ethnic areas, please remember that before military coup, or majority of the independent media houses in the country have been struggling financially because of COVID. For those organizations who are trying to survive commercially, even have been facing financial challenges even before the military coup, and military coup struck that in one stroke, and we all share that. But some of us got the immediate support thanks to the international community again, but we still need sustained support from the international community. My worry, and I'm sure for many of the media colleagues in Myanmar, Burma, is whether can we get this kind of support for long term, because now I get support for maybe 2 months, 3 months, which is good enough to keep running. But the fight is not for 2 months, 3 months. As I mentioned, we should be prepared at least for 2 years next. And will there be enough support for that period? That is the worry most of us are having.
Thank you, and thanks to Jane, Karen, and Isabella for those comments. Feel free to jump in again if you would like. We have another question here from Ardeth, who is asking, and I will try to get to all the questions, by the way, who is asking, there have been reports that people who allegedly support the military, referred to as Dalan in Burmese, have experienced violent attacks by protesters. Are you able to cover these news? And what are the challenges you face in covering a more balanced view in a highly charged political environment? I don't know if either of you would like to take that question. So maybe you, so.
Let me start. Yes, that is a very, one of the realities we faced in reporting in conflicts and political crisis like this. Many times we were even accused and we were stopped by some. Some of them seems to be from are the ones who are protesting against the military from doing our work. Don't do this, don't do that. And so that sort of thing. And some of us must have been even accused of being Dalan, even though we are doing reporting of doing our work. But in my opinion, I will not blame the people. It is what the military regime usually does. They use divide and rule tactics. They put things to get people confused, so that, and then once the people get confused and divided, they come with agenda. That is what the repressive military regime does all throughout. So, but the best way we could explain to the people, even those who are stopping or trying to stop us, is no, we are doing our job. Please allow us. Please allow us. We are also fighting for democracy and human rights. You also do not want a military regime to be there. So, but please allow us to do our job. That is, it succeeded, I must say, because we have seen that kind of situation in February, largely, and some part of March. But later, we don't see much of this. Now, the people can see that someone is doing his job, but someone is also fighting for them or struggling for them. So they can see that through this period.
Thank you for that answer. I don't know if Din would like to add anything. Otherwise, maybe I'll jump also to the next question from Isabella. She's asking, how are the conditions for journalists from Burma to seek exile in neighboring countries? Can they get work and stay permits easily? And how are the conditions for Burmese journalists who might like to seek political asylum in Europe? Are there any good initiatives to provide guidance or best practice that you can refer to? Maybe Thin, you have an idea about this question?
So at the moment, like I said, earlier, if you are able to leave Myanmar legally and go to another country, a neighboring country, you might probably go on a tourist visa, right? You probably won't be able to go on a business visa. So there's a question of what happens once you get there. Can you then, convert that visa into something that will allow you to stay long term? Or are you, will you have to go back after 1 month or 6 weeks? And I know there are quite a lot of different people, particularly in Thailand, that are looking to try and see whether there's any possibilities of changing that. But I haven't heard anything concrete yet. People are, so the same as in Europe as well. A lot of people leaving Myanmar so far has been to go to neighboring countries, not to, further afield than Europe, but also because a lot of it is based on, if diplomats in Myanmar know a particular editor, a particular outlet, a particular journalist. There isn't at the moment something that is established or a best practice or a guide that will actually help people who want to leave, journalists who want to leave Myanmar to either to Europe or to neighboring countries. You know, like Go So Myint was earlier saying, you know, some of his colleagues came with a court order. That's great, but you know, not everyone that turns up in neighboring countries get protection from UNHCR, which means they are at risk of, you know, being, if they overstay their visa, being arrested and then sent back to Myanmar, where they of course will face threats and harassment. So in short, as far as I know, there isn't an established guidelines or best practices for that, and it would be great. It would be great if there is.
Thank you, Thin. And on a related note, we have a question from Lisa in the chat. She's asking, you know, what are the best organizations organizing support right now that we can send potential supporters to? And I think in a general sense, not just for exiled journalists, obviously, but for media in the country. And I already see people responding in the chat about that. Karen, thank you. So this would also, I would encourage anyone to go ahead and put in the chat organizations that are organizing that type of support that people can be directed towards, and you know, Thin. And so also certainly if you would like to highlight some specific initiatives, please do so as well. And I think that would be great to have that going in the chat. Just, I see one question I haven't gotten to so far. It's from Jun Ni, who is asking, he says he was in Myanmar shortly after the Saffron Revolution in 2008. And he's saying back then newspaper editors were required to submit the final draft to the government for vetting. Prohibited stories would be crossed out with a thick red pen across the pages. So this typical censorship. Has this practice resumed since the coup? Maybe So you would like to answer that question.
It is, I'm smiling. It is worse than those years.
That's also my feeling. Yeah.
When the pre-censorship was there. Yeah, it is worse than. We don't have, I must say, independent newspaper. I would say there are two public, private newspapers being published now, but they are working within the frame of what the military regime wants them to do, and they are not being able to get out of that so far, unfortunately. Even though they want to, they are unable to do that. Media, just to share my thinking, is independent media cannot survive, cannot work under the military dictatorship, but independent media can find the space and can fight back the military dictatorship so that they can work. So it is a kind of fighting against it and also trying to work at the same time. But independent media cannot survive, cannot work, cannot function under the military regime. That's how we are seeing. The media outlets are banned. They will ban more media outlets. I'm very sure they will target more journalists, because that's how the repressive military regime function. That is how they will do. They will tell the people their propaganda stories. Like, for example, they are broadcasting now the students are studying, are coming back to school. In reality, very less percentage of the students are coming back to the schools, and majority are not coming. So the military regime will try in all possible ways. One is to brainwash, and second one is to make sure that whatever is working is within their frame. So we are back. We are worse than what it was in 2008 or after.
Thank you. So let me just make a last call for any questions from the participants. Any raised hands? But I think we've had some very good questions. So so thanks for that. Yeah, maybe we have a last question from Javier, who is asking, yeah, how do you think the situation will evolve in the near future for press freedom and human rights? Yeah, in general, where are we headed? I think so you mentioned a little bit about this already. Maybe if you just want to sort of summarize that again.
The fight will continue. The struggle will continue in next, at least for foreseeable near future. Of course, the democracy will prevail. The fight will be there, but the people will succeed. I have no doubt that the people will win. It will take time. It will not be easy. It is tough already. We have seen enough. But you know, many people will also have to sacrifice in the course of the struggle. That is how I see. It will be painful struggle. It will unfortunately, but finally it will prevail. The military will have to go back to barrack.
Great, thank you. So, and one last question here I see from Mona, who's asking what role Facebook plays in the resistance to the coup. I don't know if one of you would like to ask that question. I think maybe also, you know, social media in general. Thin, so would one of you like to mention something about the role that Facebook is playing?
I guess in general, social media, because one of the first things that the junta did when they staged the coup was to, you know, block access to Facebook because they realized it was very, very popular in Myanmar. So suddenly, you know, I saw tens of thousands of Facebook users migrating to Twitter, and now they're also using Telegram as well. So there's now suddenly a proliferation of social media that people are now using, you know, and not everyone's obviously in Myanmar. Some are in Myanmar, some are outside, and that has sort of been really shows one of the, you know, aspects of how creative the people and the protesters have been in trying to keep the issue, you know, on the news agenda and you know, in the eyes of international community, to constantly, you know, make sure that there's a hashtag on what's happening in Myanmar, which is, you know, always somewhere high, so that people, you know, constantly sees. You know, this is a young generation that grew up with social media, yeah, so they know the importance of pictures, videos, memes, and they have played a really, really important role in making sure, you know, that the news on Myanmar stays, you know, that Myanmar stays on the news, that people see it, and you know, they've done an incredible job. And I guess just last thing, just as you know, my last point is, you know, just to echo what Koso Myint said, I think the last 3 months have shown that despite all the restrictions and the oppression, independent media can work, can survive, continuing to still really play an important role and still provide quality news and breaking news, you know, not just news, but real quality news. I think the important thing is to make sure that that is sustained over a long period of time, and to do that, we're going to need support from every corners of the world, really.
I like to add one important point for your note. You know, military regime banned the Facebook, but you know, we now forget about it. If you ask many people, they even forget military bans the Facebook, because we are using Facebook. People are using Facebook. The other day, about 6 days ago, we put out our short video document how Mizzima is operating, because we want the people to know how we are also working in such and such condition. And we got 1.9 million in 6 days or 7 days viewers. So the people are fighting. What that shows that the people are fighting. The people are the people in the country know how to fight. The military regime is telling that, okay, don't watch TV channel through satellite dishes, and they take with the satellite dishes. But what the people are doing, they are painting the satellite dishes available in the country and watching the TV channel. So they find ways and means of how to fight back, how to struggle despite the repression. So I would say social media is very, very useful in the fight against the military regime. Of course, it has its own other things as well, but the people can now distinguish which is fake news and which is, because independent media outlets are also doing about the fake news, which is the this is the fake news, this is the news. So all this has been being done, and I would say that in general, the people will find ways to, even if more and more repression we may face soon, the people will find ways to fight back.
Thank you both for those messages. I know that we've gone a little bit over time, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. But I think this has been an extremely valuable briefing, and I really want to thank Thin and So for taking the time to talk to us about the situation today and to share their perspectives, and I think also suggestions also for what the international community needs to be doing. Let me just give it back to you briefly at the risk of having you repeat yourself. Maybe just one final message, the most important message that you would offer to everyone here today, what they should walk away with before we end. Maybe Thin, over to you first.
Okay, very briefly. If all you could spare is time, please continue talking about Myanmar. Please continue talking about it among yourselves, with your friends. Please educate people who may not know what is happening. If you can spare a bit more than that, please support independent media in Myanmar. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thin. So last message from you.
For me, I like to thank everyone, including IPI and all the colleagues, because we knew each other for years. And I know you have trusted us. You know that we are fighting and we keep struggling for what we believe in, and we will be doing the same under any circumstances. And the people in Myanmar will continue to struggle and will continue to fight against injustice, and they will prevail. So please continue to support the people in the country, whatever you can. And democracy is a way of the practice, and we need to strengthen democracy wherever it is, including in Burma, Myanmar.
Thin, so thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants today. As I said, I think it was extremely valuable and useful. Thank you to everyone, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much, everybody.